acceptance. Diversity is acceptance.
Diversity is life.
Diversity is understanding.
Diversity is priceless.
Acceptance.
All people working together.
Infinite.
Unity. Most definitely unity.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Diversity Leadership Alliance. My name is Joanna Deshay, and I'm so happy to be with you here this morning. I serve as the Executive Director of Diversity Leadership Alliance. It's springtime, so I thought I'd wear a little springtime color for you so we can celebrate this glorious season. It's a little hot, but we'll go with spring. We are so grateful to be here, and we just know that we could not do any of this work without our amazing volunteers and our fearless leadership in the Education Committee. Usually in this spot would be Ms. Tandra Richardson, the Education Committee Chair, but you have me today, so she had a conflict this morning. The Education Committee is responsible for bringing you all of these innovative programs that you see. They're responsible also for making sure we always have forward-thinking DEI content and subject matter. They really are looking for folks that are experts in the space that can move the needle on systemic racism and injustice. DLA has been doing powerful work around DEI and belonging this year, and we intend to raise our collective voices loud enough to drown out the hateful noise. The time is now. The time is now to have brave conversations that can turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. This month's DLA workshop is exciting, and we're going to really kind of explore a lot of the racial disparities that exist in leadership and what we can all do to help close them. We are pleased to have this timely and very relevant discussion led in this kind of new moderated presentation style that we're kind of toying around with my friend and colleague, Dr. Jeff McGee, who you'll meet in just a little bit. Before I do introduce Jeff to all of you, I want to take this time and opportunity to acknowledge and honor the land upon which we sit. I would like to acknowledge and identify the indigenous people, nations, and histories within our area. We acknowledge the Akimel O'odham, Peepash, and Yavapai people, their ancestors, their descendants, and the land itself. So this is our fourth DLA webinar. Can you believe it? We've had 4 of them already this year. And we started with a tremendous bang with Dr. Renee Batik-Klug, who just led us in a wonderful conversation. And Dr. McGee is kind of continuing in that same vein. This series examines the lack of representation in leadership. Most importantly, it will look at corporate boards and the lack of leadership in the C-suite. Before we bring Jeff on, I just want to take a minute and remind everyone, especially if you're new to us, that this is a community space. And as a community space, we want to ensure it's always inviting, it is always respectful, and it is always accessible to all. At this time, I'd love to bring on Dr. Brent Scholar, who will share our rules of engagement and set us up for a productive webinar. Brent?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Joanna, and everyone for being here today. As we know, we want a safe space. We want everyone to be able to communicate and feel comfortable doing so. We do that by, you can chat with each other, but know that we might not be using that chat for communicating with Dr. McGee or us. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A button for that. But as we're going through, please remember that you want to listen actively. that we want you to commit to foster greater empathy with each other. Try to relinquish the need to be right. Ask questions, seek clarification if you don't understand. Be respectful to the presenter and to the other attendees. There should not be like one or two of us that are just taking over the entire discussion. We want to make sure everybody gets a voice. Please make sure to approach each other from a kindness and love perspective. And as a community space, Diversity Leadership Alliance does reserve the right to remove anybody from the discussion if it does become disruptive. Also, this presentation is being recorded. And then by entering this event, you as the participants are consenting to be recorded and for that recorded presentation to be shared on Diversity Leadership Alliance's webpage, YouTube channel, and other professional media. Also, you can see we have, again, ASL translation being provided by Equal Access Services with our amazing interpreters, Heather Ivy and Jasmine Marin, who are signing for us today. So big thank you to Mr. Dave Wallenhap and his amazing team from Equal Access Services for their years of continued partnership with us and their support. So we do also value your time. So I will say we're going to put in our survey right now so you can save it and use it later. If you have to leave early, please make sure to fill that out. And without further ado, then I'm going to pass it back to Joanna.
Thank you, Brent. Greatly appreciate this. So I'm just going to go off script a little bit. They know that I try not to do this, but I am going to go slightly off script a little bit because we're live. So I just want to share with you all that. We have really been working hard, and I just want you all to know, while you may see one or two of us just here, there's a whole group of people right by our sides that are really working hard to bring you some important content that at the end of the day makes you feel like you've got those tools in your arsenal that you can utilize as a resource to implement change. And I just want to really just thank Tondra Richardson, our committee chair, but also all of the committee members. I mean, they meet quite often to ensure that they're always thinking about next level programming. And the same goes for our conference committee, because we have a conference committee that's led. Thank you so much, Brent. You see those amazing people. I wanted you to see that. And let me tell you, I know it's in this opening slide. Let me tell you why that's important. Look at the caliber of the individuals that are on this committee. Lots of PhDs, lots of diversity practitioners, lots of consultants in the space. But ultimately, even like with, Jeff that we have here running our stuff in the chat area, the other Jeff, really passionate about this work, about this space, even with our translators. We've got our all-star team with Heather that's translating for us, everybody that works with us, and Jasmine also. They are passionate. They're passionate about this work. Diversity is not what they do. Diversity is who they are. So I just hope you can appreciate the dynamic nature that is DLA, and the people that are invested at such a high level to bring you quality programming. So, okay, before I get, dinged for not following the script, back to the script I go. So today's workshop is really going to look at how we shift the space around the C-suite and corporate boards in terms of leadership. Some organizations have moved the needle on implementing more equitable and inclusive organizational cultures. However, people of color are still underrepresented in the C-suite and executive positions. And I'm sure many of you have observed it in your organizations. In today's workshop, we're going to cross-examine the assumptions about people of color in leadership positions by examining the alleged deficits that they may possess. By shifting from this deficit thinking mindset, we can explore deep-rooted assumptions and help to shift that narrative. We will explore practical ways to create change within your organization by rethinking racial leadership. Get ready to be challenged and have a little bit of fun while learning, because we're going to make sure that it is interactive. And really, that's what we're asking of you. Ask your questions, make a comment, have some reactions, and you will hear later on, we're going to ask a few of you if you would like to come on live. If you've got, if you can turn on your camera, amazing. If you don't want to turn your camera, we can just do audio, but we want to hear from you because ultimately this is your workshop. This is your learning environment, and we want to make sure that we answer your questions. So let me now introduce you to our amazing presenter that will be guiding us, along with myself, in today's conversation. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Jeff McGee. Dr. McGee is a consultant, a national speaker, presenter, and published author of the nationally recognized book, One Human Race: 5 Stages to Empowering Transformative Change. Jeff, I didn't know you wrote a book. I'll have to get that. You have to sign it for me. So he is passionate about equipping leaders with strategies and approaches to lead tomorrow's organization. His interactive approach to engagement empowers leaders to think differently and challenge their own norms. Dr. McGee has over 10 years of experience as a keynote speaker, as an educator and trainer for K-12 schools, higher education institutes, businesses, and city and county government agencies. He works tirelessly to dismantle cross-cultural and leadership misunderstandings through education, practice, and policy making. Dr. McGee serves on several local board of trustees, is a part of several community groups, and also dissertation committees. He holds a Master of Arts in Organizational Leadership from Geneva College and a doctorate in education in educational leadership from Northern Arizona University. A warm and gracious DLA welcome to Dr. Jeff McGee. Jeff?
Thank you, Joanna. And thanks for having me, DLA, on here. I'm super excited to be here and just go through this topic with you all. I'm going to share my screen. We have a lot to talk about today. And as Joanna indicated, we are going to ask some of you if you feel comfortable to come on live, and we'll be able to ask questions and engage one another. I really like that word fun that she used in there. And that's one of our core values at the company, at my company, is having fun. Sometimes we have a little bit too much fun, but hey, in the world,
no such thing.
No such thing, right? So we have to have fun, especially doing this work. It keeps you sane at some points. But just quick, as you heard my bio there, I just wanted to put this slide up here. This is our social media handles, my email address, some of the information there on us. I'm the CEO of this company, and I actually got fired from doing our social media. That's not one of my specialties. So they told me not to do social media anymore. So they just told me to put these up here for you to follow, and then they'll take it from here. Okay. All right. So let's look at what we're going to talk about today. We are going to engage in some conversations here around, sorry, my email is on. Our objectives is we're going to look at some alleged deficits that contribute to what is called and known as the racial leadership gap. We're going to look at changing and talk about changing some systemic inequities through new thinking. So I'm going to introduce, or if you're already familiar with the term triple loop learning, we're going to talk about how that has been used and how we use that with leaders all across the country and throughout the world on how to change these narratives, okay, and how to be transformative. And then the last thing we do is something I started doing a few months ago, is actually giving participants like yourself an opportunity just to engage in some of the content, right? We always want to teach, and some of you are facilitators out there, we give people all this information and then we give them some things to do afterwards. But what we started doing is actually making people do this and actually holding people accountable. So at the end, you're going to have time to reflect on this discussion and develop one idea, at least one idea that you can begin to implement within the next 7 days within your workspace. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to start off with on the first couple slides is just give you some did you knows. Okay. Now feel free to jot down some of these that you're going to see, or take a picture if you can with your mobile device, or if you have the old school cameras, which I don't even know if I've seen those anymore, but if you want to take a picture, please feel free. So here, we're going to just look at some statistics about the 50 most valuable public companies. So what happened was right after the murder of George Floyd, 50 most valuable companies collectively pledged approximately $49 billion to addressing racial inequity, okay? So when we look at this number, to me, I'm like, that is fantastic. So some of you that are in this space and working in this space, what could you do with $49 billion, right? We could do a lot. But here's the issue. Whenever you start unpeeling these layers and looking deeper, 45 billion of this 49 billion was allocated as loans or investments, meaning that these companies are giving out mortgages, doing other, giving loans out, charging interest on it. So in theory, they're going to actually make money on this. Okay, so over 90% of this money that's allocated, they're going to get back plus more. Okay, which they didn't tell us that. So when you unpeel it, only 4 billion is going to be given in grants. These grants are going to be dispersed as long as 10 years in some cases. This represents less than 1% of the $525 billion in net income earned by these top 50 companies. So while it looks good on paper, hey, we gave $49 billion to address racial inequity, it actually represents less than 1%. Okay. Here's some other facts. Walmart, and I'm not going to read every single one, but starting with Walmart, you see Cisco, Pfizer, and Costco, places like that, list no Blacks among their executive leadership as of 5 months ago. Okay. When I read this was alarming to me, not one. Conversely, Black executives make up 20% of C-suite at Merck, you see UPS, AT&T, places like that, okay? Only 13 companies include their chief diversity officers or whatever that title they're giving them in the top leadership, which is not good at all. 13 companies out of the 50 include their CDOs in top leadership. Which is more alarming, only 8% of Black C-suite executives report directly to the CEO, only 8%, okay? So as you're starting to see, we have a lot of work to do. The next one I want to look at is the nonprofit racial leadership gap. And this is from some research done, and I have the reference here. I mistakenly did not put it on here, but you can see, and this is a disparity that I saw in my current research here within Phoenix. But under 25% of the board members are people of color and executive leadership. Conversely, they make up over 50% of the staff and over 50% of the community served, okay? Another huge disparity. I would argue these numbers are a lot higher, especially the bottom two statistics here are a lot higher than what this report found. This was a national report done about four or 5 years ago, okay? Another interesting fact is just annual budgets, okay? Now this one I found very fascinating. The more money a nonprofit makes, or we'll say the nonprofit's budget is, the less people of color are on the board, okay? That's basically what this is saying. And I found this very fascinating. So we start asking ourselves some of these questions of why, okay? Why are these statistics the way they are? Okay? Why is it so important? Why are we talking about this racial leadership gap? 3 things I want to point out, and there's a lot more, but I want to highlight 3 of them right now. One of the things is because everything's changing, right? Organizations are becoming more and more diverse, and we know that. By the year 2025, we know that millennials will make up 75% of the workforce. We also know between the years of 2045 and 2050, the white population will be the minority race in the United States. okay? How we communicate is different, okay? Right now, AR devices, which is augmented reality or devices, are being rushed out to the market. So much so that within the next 10 to 12 years, Apple is already planning on replacing the iPhone with AR devices. Google, Microsoft, Facebook, including Apple, are scrambling to create these AR devices that can be worn. The way we do business is changing, right? So we went to a more hybrid workforce, and we all saw this through COVID. How we shop is changing. The service industry is changing. And now with these high gas prices, we're making life decisions at the gas pump, right? Wondering if we're going to eat or put gas in our car. Never in a million years would I have thought that I'd be in meetings with clients all across the country where they can actually see me and I'm only wearing my Marvel superhero shorts and a button-down shirt, right? So business is changing. Everything is changing. Okay.
Yeah, this is incredible to me. I'm sorry, I'm over here like taking notes vigorously just to kind of get there, but I'll let you kind of finish your thought. And I have a few questions if you don't mind. I would love to just kind of dig a little deeper into this content. So please. So if you don't mind, you want me to ask my questions now?
Sure, yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm known for just like, I'm the question woman. So I actually, by the way, I have to tell you, I am shocked at the numbers. I am shocked at the fact that only 4 billion of those are actually grants, which means you don't have to pay it back, you know, and what it just reminds me of is that puts a community of need into further debt, right? Because now they have to borrow, right? Or take out some kind of lending mechanism, but then the company can mark it as we're doing good, right? Check off that box, we're doing good. As we both know, it is so imperative, right, to make sure that we have racial, ethnic, and gender diversity in both board members, in the C-suite. But how do leaders do that? I mean, honestly, how do they cultivate these kind of diverse candidates? And even more than that, Jeff, how do we do that without it seeming performative, right? Or that they're putting up their black squares or checking off a box? What advice would you give there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I find myself in that position as we speak within a board that I sit on, and I'm not going to name the board, but it's one of those things where I was brought on just to check that box. And as a person of color, you know, when you're brought on a board or brought into a leadership position just to check a box. But one of the things I tell my clients and people all the time is that word intentionality has to be there. We have to be intentional about bringing people of color onto nonprofit boards, onto corporate boards, and to positions of leadership. Being intentional about not only bringing them on, but valuing their presence, valuing their gifts, valuing their skills and what they can bring to the table. So when we talk about, you know, what can leaders do? We all have understood, or if you're not aware of the business case of diversity among our leadership teams, and paying attention to some of the outcomes of having a diverse board or leadership group and how it creates more innovation and productivity and creativity and things like that. So what people really need to do is be intentional and say, we're going to hire or bring on, volunteer people of color into positions of power, and we're going to place a value on that position. Another thing, if you're in a leadership position, as you saw the one statistic I gave you, one of the things is when you're bringing people of color on in leadership positions, especially executive positions, reporting to the CEO says a lot about the value you're giving that person. So if you're having that person reporting to someone else, that really doesn't show the value that you're giving that person. So that's how I would advise a leader that is looking to diversify the board or their leadership team. Be intentional, go out and find those people. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on too.
I love that. I love that. Now I'll ask you another sidebar. You know, they know I'm notorious for going off script, so we're gonna roll with it. So a CEO asked me the other day, we've been very intentional, great word, about bringing on people of color and just diversifying our board. But what we've never had is their photos up. So just by reading someone's name, people don't know that our board is now, diverse, and we've got, and he said, is it being too performative to now put up board member pictures? And as you saw in the opener, we always have our board member photos up. That's something we've done since inception, but is that a shift that an organization can do without it being, seen as they're just doing it to highlight their Black board member?
Absolutely. I would encourage people, if you're in a leadership position, to put the photos of everyone on your board or leadership team on the website. One of the things we talk about is the idea of being transparent in what you're doing. Our organization, whenever we're working with the client, that's the very first thing we do is go to their website, click on the About Me section, and it brings up who we are or whatever it says. And you can see the board or the leadership team there, right? And it's funny because sometimes I've seen, this is funny, Joanne, I've seen DEI-driven organizations that have all majority culture on their website in leadership positions, people of color in more of the mid-level frontline workers, but they're presenting themselves to being extremely diverse and everything like that. I find that fascinating, funny, but fascinating at the same time. So yes, put your people on the board or on your website. Absolutely.
That's excellent. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So this is great.
Yep. Okay. All right. All right, Jonah, I'm going to keep on rolling here.
Yeah, please do. I'm here with you.
All right, awesome. So I'm going to keep moving, and we're now going to shift into this quote that I always like to say. So when we're talking about this leadership gap, if the present is unsatisfactory, it's likely a poor decision was made yesterday. One of the things we have to think about when it comes to the perspective of people of color is we have to take a historical lens, okay, and look through this historical lens and see, why do people have this perception of people in color? So what happened? So we have to talk about this idea of the concept of race, okay? The concept of race is different from the actual term race, okay? And I like to separate those two. And we're just going to focus on the concept of race. The concept of race is a man-made idea that one culture is better than the other culture. That's the concept of race. What we're doing is giving race an understanding. We're putting meaning behind the term race. This is the concept of race, okay? The other thing is we have to look at the laws and public opinion, okay? And I'm going to give you some examples of what laws I'm talking about. The first one we're going to look at is the enactment of hereditary slavery law of Virginia in 1662. So what we saw here was women, Negro women, were being raped by their slave masters. What was happening is the product of that rape would be a child. The child would be biracial. Before 1662, that child would be free because they had white in them. This law changed that. This law said, if the child comes out biracial, it's the condition of the mother that serves, the child will serve according to the condition of the mother, which means the mother's Negro, so the child will be a slave, okay? This is one law of many that I wanted to highlight that started changing the perception and giving the hierarchy within the white and Black culture, okay? Another one is called the Baptism Law of 1667. This law basically said that slaves can be baptized, but baptism doesn't mean freedom. So if you think about the Europeans when they immigrated to this country, and I use the word immigrated, whites and the Europeans immigrated to this country, okay? And what was happening was they were Christian, right? They were escaping religious tyranny over in Europe. They came here and established their Christian beliefs. In baptism, baptism means freedom in the spiritual sense and the physical sense. So people were being baptized, or slaves being baptized and set free. This law changed that, okay? Saying that slaves can be baptized, but baptism doesn't mean freedom. It only means freedom for whites, okay? This third one is very interesting law. This is called the Casual Killing Act of 1669. This made it legal to kill slaves if they resisted their master while they were correcting their behavior, okay? Made it legal. What's interesting about this is, if you fast forward almost 300 years, almost exactly 300 years to 1967, another law was made in which the Supreme Court ruled in the case of police violence against civil rights demonstrators in Mississippi, that police officers should not face legal liability for enforcing the law in good faith and with probable cause. Many experts have connected the Casual Killing Act of 1669 to the 1967 law that we see today, okay? Another one, and I didn't put it up here as a bullet point, if you've heard of the phrase, kill the Indian, save the man, okay? Kill the Indian, save the man. This phrase was coined back in the late 1800s by a captain named Richard Pratt. Richard Pratt was one of the founders, and amongst others, who founded boarding schools to sought to, what they said, in quotes, civilize and quote, Americanize the Indian. So kill the Indian means kill the culture. And then what they're saying, and what was said was save the man, was make them American, okay? Make them white. So through laws and public opinion, and I just gave you these 4 examples just to show you how this perception started shifting and started changing, okay? How we see people of color. The second one I want to go into, and when we talk about the perception, you go back into and look at things like this book called The Negro Beast and in the Image of God. So this was a 382-page book published in 1900. And it was a very successful publication, okay? And it reached countless thousands, millions of people during that time. Basically, the idea behind this book was, and you remember, this was a, quote, Christian nation. So the Bible is a really good source, and this book is a really good source of understanding for many people. The author, Charles Carroll, what he did was he used the Bible, and what he thought was to shape the understanding that Blacks, a Negro, was actually a beast, and whites were made in the image of God, okay? You will find it very hard to find this book, but I was actually able to find a PDF copy of it online just by Googling it and doing some digging. I found the PDF version of this book. Haven't read it, too many pages for me to read right now. However, he characterized this Black man as this animalistic creature, right? And if you're familiar, and if you are familiar with the Bible, and it talks about, you know, the Garden of Eden and how Adam and Eve were made, he talks about how the Negro was made on the 5th day with the other animals. The next day, man was created, which was a white man. Okay, so that's the idea behind this book. Next, we have to look at the birth of a nation. Okay, it was originally called Klansman. So this movie was made in 1915, and it was equivalent to your Star Wars or Avatar of the time. So this movie portrayed free Blacks as heathens, uncivilized, not worthy of being free, okay? And one of the things that talked about was this fear of that the Black man would prey on white women, okay? So, which is kind of curious because we heard that probably, 2016, whatever it was, during a presidential campaign. I heard people say, be careful of Black and brown people going into suburbs and preying on white women. This is where they got this from, this movie, The Birth of a Nation, okay? Next, The Imitation of Life. This movie was made in 1934, and this perpetuated the idea that Black women were happy, okay? They were They served in this mammy type of stereotype, right? And it minimized the Black woman's role as this happy houseworker or maid or cook, okay? And I know most of you have heard the movie Gone with the Wind. In this movie, it glorified slavery. It embraced this common myth that Blacks were actually happy to be slaves and that slavery really wasn't that bad. So it showed this romanticized version of slavery while debunking the truth of the horrific treatment that they experienced. So based on this understanding, we can start understanding this historical perception of people of color that was established way back into the 1600s. And if we're fast forwarding into today, we have to say and start asking ourselves these questions of, well, no wonder why people have this perception of Black or brown or other people of color, okay? So moving on, some of these deficits that I've heard of, and there's more, but you hear people of color, they're not qualified enough, or they're not educated enough to assume leadership positions. I've heard that many times. They lack aspiration, okay? The aspiration part is the historical understanding that Black and brown people are lazy. They don't want to do nothing. They don't want to work. They lack the skills needed to do the job, okay? They're not smart enough. They don't have the ability to do this, okay? This last one, I don't know, I've heard this probably more than anything. I don't know any people of color to be considered for leadership roles, okay? So these are some of these common deficits, some of these understandings that people are having when it comes to people of color when we're looking at leadership and this gap in leadership. Okay. I like this quote by Toni Morrison. In this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate, okay? I don't know if you've ever thought about that. When I look at this, there's truth to it. When you look at, again, from a historical lens, okay, the mindset behind what does it mean to be American? We see it now in our political climate, what it means to be American, what it means to not be American, okay? And we understand this to be this idea of white, right? Whiteness, white supremacy, white privilege, which I just put on here as the white trio, okay? So when we're looking at the perception of people of color in the United States and then, you know, throughout the land here, we have to look at this white trio. First one is whiteness, okay? Critical white studies defines whiteness as a broad social construction. And I added this part because I just felt this was the best way to encapsulate it, but basically embraces everything that's white is right, okay? So in our society, whiteness is this default standard. So we have to look at it from a color standard, right? Where racial and ethnic minorities are evaluated and judged and often found to be lacking or inferior or deviant or abnormal, right? Because they don't add up to what this standard of white, okay? So because this idea of whiteness is considered normative or ideal, it really automatically confers dominance on fair-skinned people in our society, okay? But this whiteness is predicated on white supremacy, okay? And it really makes people of color invisible to things. White supremacy, and this is very interesting. One of the things when we talk about white supremacy, we have to break the word down. When many times we say, well, what's white supremacy? We hear KKK, right? We hear these extremist groups. But the word supremacy is what we need to really, really focus on. Supremacy, and from an individual supremacy, think of like a king, right? Ruling over a kingdom, having absolute authority, right? That's supremacy. Then there's group supremacy, meaning when one group dominates another group, that's supremacy. For example, a country's military has military supremacy over another, or a sports team has supremacy over another team. This is supremacy. So add that into, and we're going to say white supremacy. And I love this definition by Martinez, right? It's historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of continents, nations, and people of color by whites and nations of the European continent for the purpose of maintaining and defending a system of wealth, power, and privilege. Okay. So when we're talking about white supremacy, again, we have to come at it from an angle of history. 3 key facts when we talk about the establishment of white supremacy. First, we have to remember that the United States was created by military conquest. So before the European invasion of the New World, there were approximately 9 to 18 million indigenous people living in North America. After the Indian Wars, there was approximately 250,000 people left in what is now the United States, and even less than that in what is now Canada, okay? So we have to talk about the genocide of indigenous people and the confiscation of their land. Enslaved African labor. The United States could not have developed economically without enslaved African labor. What was happening, there was a labor shortage as the agricultural and other industries began to grow in the late 1790s. So this growth period, it's called the market revolution. So it was during this period where the US changed from really being agricultural to more of an industrial corporate economy. So here we found the implementation of banks, the credit system, tariffs, transportation systems, things like that. The key to the market revolution was the export of cotton, which made it possible by slave labor. This is a statistic that many of us may not know. Cotton accounted for 75% of Southern trade in the mid 1800s, where enslaved Africans did not receive any of the profits. Think about that. Cotton was made up 75% of the Southern trade, and enslaved Africans received nothing as far as profits. Also, we have to look at the takeover of Mexico, the Mexican-American War in 1848, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where Mexico had to give up parts of its country, which is present-day California, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and then parts of Arizona. The final part of Arizona was given to the US in 1853 by the US threatening to have another war, okay? So when we're talking about white supremacy, we have to keep in mind of how it was established, okay? Again, this is going back, this is giving you a historical lens to seeing why we have this racial gap today. And then white privilege was the last one. And many of you, I'm sure, have studied white privilege, been in different conferences and seminars with talking about white privilege. So I'm not going to go deep into this, but I like this definition by Francis Kendall: having greater access to power and resources than people of color in the same situation do. Okay, so we know that white privilege is both unconsciously enjoyed, right, but consciously perpetuated. To overcome this racial leadership gap, we need to address white privilege that's embedded in the governance and our leadership models. Okay, very important. We have to start addressing. This is how we start creating spaces for people of color. And going back to Joanna's questions, this is how we have to start creating these spaces for people of color to get into leadership position, okay? By addressing the white privilege that's there. How do we do that? And I put in just a couple of questions. I'm not going to go through each one. And there's more questions that you can ask yourself. But as you're looking at these questions here, what are some that just jump out at you, right? Right, so you think about what's considered a good employee, okay? What's considered uncomfortable behaviors? How is success defined? things like that, right? One question I didn't put up here, and many of you have might have heard about it, but how women of color wear their hair in their organization, right? We've heard that before. We've seen it before, okay? How are they viewed? Okay. So these are some of the questions that kind of get your brain going and start thinking about, well, what can I do to create change within the organization? And we're going to go through the next session here shortly, but I'll pause here for if there are any questions or anything.
I am so glad you said the hair thing. I mean, so much so that the Crown Act had to be enacted. I mean, just think about that. That says that it is against the law to discriminate someone based on how they choose to wear their hair. If you don't think that the inequity exists in the system, there's no other laws, right, that are enacted for anyone else saying, you know, and I'm being a bit facetious here, but the Bald Man's Act or whatever, you know what I mean? That just says that if you choose to wear your hair that way, then, you know, you must be protected. The system is designed to protect you already, and it's kind of an unspoken, and that's the underpinnings of it. I just want to, before I ask a few questions, Dr. McGee, I want to acknowledge this kind of conversation that I'm seeing happening in the chat. And I thank you all for being transparent. I thank you all for being open. And I thank you all for being respectful as everyone kind of expresses their views. But someone talks about this idea of what happened to just filling the positions with the best candidates, right? Someone that just meets the requirements. And the problem with that is there are all of these systems that go way beyond our understanding, that are embedded in everything from education to healthcare, you know, to government, that we don't even see. We think we understand, but I mean, they go far, you know, they go to our founding fathers, if you would. And so when we look at that, I think that it's important, and I'm addressing the comment because I actually teach in higher ed. So I'm also a professor at Arizona State University. And I will tell you that the one thing that we are doing is trying our best and trying better to ensure that our students have all the language, have all the history, that they know all the sides of the story, as opposed to the ones that were carefully crafted, right, to continue, right, to build a certain narrative. That's really what it is. So as I'm seeing these discussions, I love that you all are kind of really thinking about having this better understanding, you know, of what it looks like. And the other thing I want to just mention is we're talking about best qualified candidates. If everyone in the room looks like each other, their lens, right, of who is best and who is qualified, more importantly, who belongs, right, in our culture, our group, at our table, right, is predicated on whether or not there's alignment. Do they look like me? Do they sound like me? Are they from the same socioeconomic background? Are, you know, and that's just human nature, to draw parallels and similarities, to be able to, you know, find connection to people. It takes a lot more to say, this person doesn't think like me, look like me, sound like me, but boy, do they bring value to the organization. I relish the fact that they have a diverse thought around this, and I would love to explore that more. That's the more challenging part, right? Dr. McGee, so I wonder if you could just talk on the chat that's been going on. And thank you all, by the way. I'm really enjoying reading the chat as you've been presenting, so. Unmute yourself, Jeff.
Sorry about that.
No worries, thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to get caught up on the chat.
Good.
and read through it. Yeah, I think when we're talking about you know, hiring diverse candidates and how do we do that, you know, Joanna, you touched on it, and I saw someone put it in the chat. You know, we do have to address bias, right? And it's difficult to say, and I saw the one comment on there, hiring the best qualified person for the position. Theoretically, yes, that would work, but in reality, that's not what happens because of bias. So we look at things like when we're reading through resumes, we're looking at the name of the candidate, right? There's a lot of research around, I know that Johns Hopkins did some research and some other universities did research on just looking at the name, right, of a candidate, and how there's discrimination that exists there, right? And that's why some organizations have went through this, the blind resume, looking at a resume, blindly, we'll call it, removing the name, removing where people are living, removing where they went to school, to start eliminating some of this bias. But I go back to my comment earlier about intentionality. You can be intentional about diversifying your board or your leadership team. There's nothing wrong with that. And going back to this statement, when we say, well, we don't know any people of color that are qualified enough for these positions. Well, that's where you need to start expanding your network, right? You need to start getting out into the community and with people from different groups, cultural groups, racial groups, and even socioeconomic groups, right? And start spreading the word about what you're doing, what the jobs you're hiring for. I saw another comment in there, and I agree with it 100%. When we talk about looking for these job candidates, or I'm looking for these candidates for these positions, where are you recruiting, okay? Do people have to pay a membership just to get access to your job description, okay? There's some disparities there. Are you putting it on sites, on media sites or newspaper? I don't know if people read the newspaper anymore, but putting it on places where it's more diverse and people have an opportunity to apply for these positions. So again, it's all about intentionality behind hiring people. And I see this one comment just popped in, doing a better job of outreach and getting the information out there in the community.
Jeff, the chat, I'm focusing, but the chat is on fire right now, which I love. I'm so thrilled to all of you for the engagement. And I will just pull out a comment that someone made, which is, what tables are you going to, right? Are you putting, because a lot of times, here's what happens. I do a lot of work with executives, right? I train a lot of executives, and they always say, well, they can always come to us. We're such a welcoming organization. And I said, why do people have to come to you? This idea of pushing in as opposed to pushing out, why not go to their events and see what they're doing and support them at their home? It's like, saying someone always comes to your house, right? Yep. Have you been to their house? I used to have a colleague like that. Everyone always went to their house, but they never went like, oh, well, they live in South Mountain. I don't know. I've never been to that area, and I hear it's kind of dangerous. And I'm like, I live in South Mountain. Yeah. There's nothing. I see more Teslas in my neighborhood than anywhere else. So let's be real about it. So there's a perception there. I love this comment that someone talks about with them hiring the first Black firefighter for a small government agency. And they make the point that the reason they were able to do that is because of where they were promoting the job. So they ended up, promoting with the Black and Hispanic firefighters organizations and various women's organizations. And that's oftentimes we don't do enough of that. And we don't also get to the place where we're a little uncomfortable, because, it can be, if it's not your community, it can be uncomfortable, and that's okay. Having, uncomfortable, awkward conversations should not preclude you from having uncomfortable, awkward conversations.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
No, the chat is like tremendous right now. So thank you all. I'm loving that. But I do want to ask something, because this is what I see a lot, Dr. McGee. And in the training I do with executives, I see this time and time again, especially when you were talking about the white trio. It kind of spawned some thoughts for me around defensiveness. Oftentimes I hear a lot of folks say, well, that's not me. I had nothing to do with that. But how do leaders get over that? How do they get over the idea of being defensive at the thought of white privilege existing, and even more so at the thought of white privilege benefiting them? So what are your thoughts there?
That's a fantastic question. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in our final segment here. But one of the biggest things, because I've been doing this for years, and one of the biggest things I've seen when it comes to terms like white privilege or white supremacy or things like that, is people don't understand the definition of what it is, okay? So what happens is they become defensive when the term's being said. Even critical race theory, for example, you think critical race theory, it sets people off, or white privilege, it sets people off. I like to ask one question. whenever someone gets really defensive with some of these terms, I ask one question, and I would encourage all you to do the same thing. All I ask is, what is that term, right? What is white privilege? And then just be quiet. What is critical race theory? And then just be quiet and let them explain to you what it is. And 9 times out of 10, I can probably say 9.99 times out of 10, people have the wrong understanding of these definitions. So what we do when it comes to white privilege and discussing white privilege with majority culture groups and organizations is we don't address it head on. Meaning, one of the things, if you understand adult learning principles, it's an adult learner needs to, when they understand something, they understand it through themselves versus me telling them what it is, right? They understand it from talking it through, right? From their experiences. So what we'll do is say, okay, we'll talk about privilege, for example. And one of my friends and colleagues, Rory, uses this example of, she starts off with talking about privilege with left-handed people and right-handed people.
Yep.
And she starts building from that, right? So we call that going through the side door to get to your point, right? So we go through this side door and just start talking about, well, what's privilege, okay? Start understanding what's the privileges that right-handed people have that left-handed people don't have. Right. We start talking about socioeconomic privileges, privileges within education, having a doctorate degree or not having a doctorate degree. Now people start understanding this term privilege. Then when we talk about white privilege, 9 times out of 10, and I've seen this happen time and time again, we really don't have to even explain white privilege to them because they've understood the term privilege. So think about the approach that you're taking when you're having these conversations and how people learn information. So that's how we do it, and that's why people get defensive, because they don't understand what the term means.
That's powerful. You know, it's so interesting. I do a lot of times when I do a training with executives, I always do this privilege walk exercise, and it is profound, right? When we kind of take steps forward and backward based on the seats that we sit in and the things that we experience. And I always talk about things like even the gas. We were joking about it earlier, right? But I have students, literally, Dr. McGee, that cannot make it to class. Do you know why? My class is Monday and Wednesday, and they get paid on Friday, and they literally have $20 in their account. And the gas for their vehicle is $60. They don't even have enough to get to class. And so my privilege is that while I may be a bit disgruntled when I get to the gas pump, I can fill my tank up and not bat an eye, and know that I'll be okay and I'll get to where I need to get to, that I won't have to cancel meetings because I can't put gas in my car. I mean, it was such a privileged position to sit in, but we all have them. Use the left-hand example. That is a powerful one. Something as innocuous as, but if you think about it, the desks are all different. And when I did this, I had an executive like almost tear up, and she says, that's why I always sit on the corner so that I can write, the other way. That's why. And they're like, oh my gosh, we never realized that that's the position you take. And she says, I have to be aware of it because it's something I need. But think about that. She said, the world is made for you right-handers, which is true. So I love that. I really love that. And I look forward to hearing more about kind of some of the triple loop learning models that you're going to get into next. So thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I do want to introduce, or if you are familiar with this concept of triple loop learning. And this has been a game changer for many, many people in leadership. So triple loop learning, and before I get into that, I'll tell you a quick story. So, and it kind of goes along with this topic and idea of white privilege. I'm located here in the Phoenix metro area, and I went to a community that is has a lot of money. I'll just put it out there like that. They got a lot of money, very rich community. And I was asked to present on a topic of white privilege. So what I did as I was driving there, I kept asking myself and saying to myself, I cannot just come out and say, you have white privilege. I cannot come out and say, you have to stop your white privilege, understand it, help combat it, mitigate it, all that stuff. I couldn't do that because I knew the dynamics of the group. So as I was driving up there, I started thinking about this concept of triple loop learning. And this concept of triple loop learning, and I'll get into this in a second, really highlights the understanding of how people learn, okay? So when I went there, I remember walking into the room, there's about 25, and it was white, older men. They were all over 50, between 50 and 70, I would say, white, very, very affluent men. And I remember sitting down and just having a conversation, starting a conversation with them. And then we started talking about why I was there, right? To start unpacking white privilege. So I just asked them the question, what do you think white privilege is? And they started saying things like, I don't have white privilege because I worked hard for everything I earned. White privilege is something that people of color just made up about us just to, get ahead or something like that. And they started talking through their understanding of white privilege, and they started getting a little upset, a little angry as we were talking through this. And I remember, after they got done, and it was kind of my turn to speak, I started saying, okay, let's start unpacking privilege first. And then we started unpacking that. And as we started unpacking that, I started seeing some light bulbs going off. Then when we got to white privilege, the term white privilege, they were able to start digesting it a little bit better, okay? And I started debunking some of the things they started saying, okay? I told them where the term white privilege came from, okay? The actual term was not, it was a white person came up with that term, which they were shocked. Then I started hearing and started talking about and debunking how watching certain news stations really has impacted their thinking. Long story short, after the conversation was over, they thanked me for coming out there. They learned some things. They actually wanted to continue the discussion, continue learning on this topic. So it turned into this, and in the beginning, this hostile, we'll call it, conversation to them really starting to say, okay, I want to learn more about this. Okay, this is kind of the idea of triple loop learning. Triple loop learning, and if you can write this down, take a picture of this. We're talking about learning how to learn by recalling how you learned in the first place. Very important. So what we're doing is we're challenging existing worldviews and cultural beliefs by rethinking how we learned, where we learned, who taught us. We're examining new beliefs, values, and systems, right? An example I always like to use is we were all taught, we were all taught in first grade that Christopher Columbus founded America, right? That's what we were taught. We know that that's not true. Number one, I always said, how can you find something that wasn't lost, right? That, I don't know. That's like me saying, well, I'm gonna go to the bank and I just found some money in the bank, right? Right? So it doesn't work like that. So we have to think about, why were we taught Christopher Columbus founded America, right? We learned that where? In school, K-12. Who taught us, right? So we start examining that through a new lens and start critically analyzing where we learn and how we learn and who taught us and the purpose of them teaching us something. So with triple loop learning, we really get to explore new ways of thinking and behaving. Now we can start producing new outcomes. So this is the excitement behind triple loop learning. So I'm going to further break this down, okay? So when we're looking at triple loop learning, there's 3 loops, and I'm going to go through all 3 of them here for you. The first 2 loops were developed by 2 professors, and I think they were from Harvard, if I'm not mistaken, Chris Arguez and Donald Schoen. And in the early 1970s, what they did was their work sought to examine, how do organizations learn, okay? So they examined leaders, how leaders learn, how they create change within their organizations. So one of the main purposes behind this organizational learning It really sought to create ongoing changes in culture in small, moderate, and transformative ways. So what happened was, as I was doing research on this triple loop learning idea within this organizational context, I really started thinking, this is how we learn as individuals, okay? So I shifted this thinking that we use within my organization as we do our consulting and things like that. And we're using triple loop learning to help people relearn things. So some of the questions that are being asked in the chat and that Joanne had talked about, it all comes down to, how did you learn that information? Where did you learn it from? Okay. So I want to talk about the concept of single loop learning here for a quick minute. So single loop learning, leaders and organizations really modify their actions according to the difference between expected and reached outcomes. So in other words, it's simply, when something goes wrong, we only consider how to fix it, okay? So as you can see, it focuses on action. It's just incremental change, okay? The biggest problem with just using single loop learning is that we only remove the symptoms while the root causes remain. In single loop learning, the questions we are asked are things like, what do I know? What should I know? And better yet, answers the question, are we doing things right? Okay, so I want you to make a note of this. Single loop learning answers the question, are we doing things right? Okay, so I'll give you a second to write that down, because as we go through this, it's going to start connecting and making sense, hopefully. Okay, single loop learning, are we doing things right? So here, we're talking about following the rules. And many leaders operate according to this single loop learning by establishing rigid strategies and policies and procedures, and then they spend their time detecting and correcting deviations from the rules, okay? So you might exhibit this kind of learning when you notice that an employee is not producing a certain deliverable on time during a project. So the leader will get angry at the employee and demand that they produce that deliverable without really ever exploring why the employee did not produce that deliverable in the first place, okay? So remember, in single loop learning, we're answering the question, am I doing things right, okay? Okay, moving into double loop. So now, after we've tried a few changes, or we've tried some changes to improve the results, we can stop and deliberately think about what we're doing, right? And what could be ways to optimize this outcome. So this type of learning involves more thinking outside the box, right? More creative and critical thinking, okay? It really helps leaders understand why a particular solution works better than others to solve a problem or achieve a goal, okay? Here, we're contemplating our assumptions. Okay, remember, contemplating our assumptions, how we think about things. We're focusing on the frame within our actions that take place. Okay, we're analyzing our own processes. We're asking questions like, what is going on here? Or what are some of the patterns here? Double loop learning answers the question, are we doing the right things? Okay, so remember, single loop says, are we doing things right? Double loop says, are we doing the right things? Okay, I'll give you a second to jot that down. Okay. So here, we're changing the rules, okay? So in double loop learning, leaders learn about learning, and they learn about changing these rules. So this is really necessary for more complex issues, okay? So double loop learning really leads to deepening the understanding of our assumptions and how we make better decisions every day. And we were talking here in the chat, many people were bringing up questions about hiring practices, okay? This is where we're starting to focus and putting some double loop learning into this, okay? We're looking about taking responsibility for things, okay? We're looking at being honest and candor. with our decisions and what we're doing. And this taps into being self-aware, right? Starting to understand our biases, starting to understand ourselves. Okay? Again, double loop, we're looking at, am I doing the right things? So now we're going to move into triple loop. So in triple loop, so to be transformed, we have to renew our mind. Okay, we have to think differently. Renew comes from this Greek word, and I'm not going to say it because I can't pronounce it, but you can see it there. It means to cause to grow up new. And I love that phrase, to cause to grow up new. Okay, do something different, do something new, right? So that's what we're doing, we're renewing our mind. With triple loop, we're focusing on the context, okay? Very important, we're focusing on the context of things, which frames our assumptions, our actions, and our behaviors. So here, we're exploring our worldview and our values to understand the systems in our society that are in place. So when we're talking about this racial leadership gap, we can't just have a single or double loop approach to it. We have to have a triple loop approach where we're exploring systems. That's why I wanted to start this session with a historical lens of understanding how these systems were put in place, how they were implemented. So in order for us to bridge this racial leadership gap, it's just not hiring a person of color for that position. It's breaking down the systems within our organizations that are causing and perpetuating white privilege and other types of behaviors, okay? So we're understanding here the decisions that are being framed to make our behaviors, okay? We're focusing on our purpose, the values that guides us. Here is where we're looking at your mission statement. You're looking at your core values, okay? And which is funny to me sometimes, because when you look at core values, an organization's core values, how does that measure up to what they're doing within the DEI work, right? This is where triple loop learning gets to the core of things. Triple loop answers the question, how do we decide what's right? How do we decide what's right? Okay.
God, that's powerful.
So, sorry, I'm thinking I'm losing my voice here.
No. If you want to take a drink of water, please do so. And I love the chat that's happening. What I would love to do is I would love to know if there's anyone we have in the chat. You guys have been so active, and I'm so pleased to see the depth of the conversation, the thoughtfulness about the comments. And I want to see if anyone, as we get to the Q&A portion, wants to come on live. So you can either ask your questions, I said, in person, or even if you just want to do audio so we can hear you, because there's just some tremendous dialogue that's happening. And I want to make sure that we're able to kind of vet some of the thought processes and, and get a little deeper into them. So definitely, if you would like to come on live, with just let us know in the chat, and we'll ping you and be able to bring you live as we move forward. But I love this idea of this triple loop learning. I really, really do. Because here's the thing, oftentimes we don't ask ourselves that question. You know what I mean? We don't ask ourselves, how do you decide if it's right? We don't like, it's this idea that, the moral compass doesn't really apply and can be shifted and moved in terms of what is right and what is wrong. And I know we were talking earlier when we were kind of looking at the presentation and in conversation about this notion of empathy, which, by the way, we're going to target that at one of our workshops or at conference, right? The idea of caring for your employees deeply. And what someone said is, sometimes our leaders make us feel like having empathy makes them weak. It's a sign of weakness, but we're finding more and more that empathetic leadership, and this idea of deciding what is right and what is good and what will actually help your people grow, in the space, gets you, closer to this idea of belonging for them, right? And makes them feel like they belong to this this place. They belong to, this organization, and that this organization values them. So in your presentation on triple loop learning, the one thing we did talk about and address was this idea of learning how to recall how you learned in the first place, right? So this recollection piece. From your experience, can there be any threats that cause people not to want to relearn this information? What are those barriers looking like?
Yeah, good question. So from my experience, there's two threats to triple loop learning, and many of you are familiar with it. The first is what's called confirmation bias, okay? And then the second one is called bandwagon bias, okay? So those two biases I've found have been the biggest threats to it. Bandwagon bias, as many of you understand that phrase as groupthink, kind of the same thing, right? So with confirmation bias, it's this idea that people seek out information and data that only confirms their pre-existing ideas. And they tend to ignore contrary information.
Yes.
So, and we saw that a lot, and I made reference to it with our current political climate. But and I'm sure many of you know, there's two news stations out there, right? One for each side. So instead of people opening their mind and trying to learn something new from a different news station, they focus on one and whatever they say, and that's what they get their beliefs from. That's just one example of confirmation bias. Another thing with confirmation bias, and we talk about this when we're talking about how we're hiring diverse populations, is we only seek out information from groups we feel comfortable with, okay? We only seek out information from groups that think like us, that act like us, that walk like us, that talk like us. That's what's wrong, in my opinion, with leadership groups today, is because you have this leadership group that all thinks the same way. And that's why many of us on here as DEI or equity experts are trying to help organizations diversify and really combat this idea of confirmation bias. When we think about groupthink, and this is one concept that I've done a lot of research on, it was really brought up or discovered, introduced by Irving Janis back in the early 70s. And groupthink is this idea that decision-making groups will do whatever it takes to really achieve extreme consensus, okay? So two examples of that is, I'm trying to think, okay, one example, the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba in the early 1960s. And the other one is the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in the mid-1980s. So in the Bay of Pigs, we really saw where President Kennedy wanted to overthrow Fidel Castro so bad that he ignored his own military's advice. So his team, his group of close advisors did not heed to the military's strategic advice because they wanted to get him out so bad. So you had this concept of groupthink happening where President Kennedy said, this is what we're going to do, and everyone's afraid to combat it or say, well, no, maybe we should rethink this, right? Same thing that happened with the Challenger disaster in the mid-1980s, right? NASA and I can't remember the other guy, there was another guy that was associated with, they felt pressured to launch, and they knew that they shouldn't launch because of the temperature, right? But people were afraid to say something. So you had this idea of groupthink where everyone just said, okay, I don't want to rock the boat. I just need to go along with this. Maybe there was job security in it. I don't know. But this idea of groupthink really challenges triple loop learning as well.
That's wonderful. No, that's powerful because and hearing those two things in terms of the confirmation bias and the bandwagon bias is important. And that's what I always say. People go, oh, I heard someone literally say this in a training I was doing a couple of months ago. They said, well, this person happened to belong to the Hispanic community. And they said, well, I'm a person of color, so I don't have any biases, you know, and I'm like, it's actually human nature, right? To have, and we all, and some of them are subtle. They're not all related to race, but they're learned. They're picked up from our culture. They're picked up from media. They're picked up from, you know, but they also cause us to make judgment. They also cause us to have, and some is a quick judgment, you know, and it really is something that I think we need to recognize that it's not specific to one group of people, race of people, in terms of these biases. They're learned behaviors, but like anything else that's learned, right, Dr. McGee, you can unlearn it, right? Or you say, I love the way you say relearn it.
Yep.
I love that kind of retraining yourself. And so how do you think I'm just going to ask another question. We kind of hadn't talked about this one, but what's the starting point for triple loop learning? What's the starting point for, you know, being more intentional and mindful about making decisions around what is right? Is there like something leaders can begin to do to kind of activate this type of learning?
Yeah. And so that's a good question, because I can't talk right now. I not only facilitate and teach on this topic of triple loop learning, but I myself have gone through it and still go through it all the time. And the very first thing you have to do as a leader is be humble enough to say, I may not have the right answer. I may not know something. And that's something that even in leadership development that is being taught. You know, be humble enough to say, I don't know. Okay. Start understanding your own biases. That's a great first step. Start understanding your own biases, and then start bringing people around you that think differently. Do it on purpose. Be intentional about it, right? We talked earlier about being intentional about going out and hiring people from different community groups, right? You have to go out and do that. So the very first step, understand yourself. And I developed a 5-point model. It talks about how we build collaboration and how we build our inclusive leadership skills. It's the same thing. The first step is understand yourself. Be humble enough to say, I don't know something, or I need more information on something, and be humble enough to say, I need to check my own biases at the door, right? So that's the very first step we can do as a leader, in starting to understand something. And that goes back to, you know, the confirmation bias. You know, when people they only seek out information to confirm existing beliefs. Well, start seeking out information that's different, just to learn something, right? So a lot of us do, or some of us do work within racial equity, right? I met a gentleman several years ago that did not believe, let me rephrase that. I met a white gentleman many years ago that said he's fighting against racism in a different way. He's fighting for, he's saying that white men are being highlighted, and there's racism towards white men because society is now pushing for more diversity, where white men are losing their, he didn't say privilege, but that's kind of what he was saying, right? I could have checked that guy out quick and said, okay, forget it, I'm not even talking to you. But I embraced him. I wanted to learn where he was coming from. I wanted to learn how he was thinking, right? And although him and I disagree vehemently on his idea, and he disagrees with mine, we're still able to sit and have a great conversation. But the whole idea is learning something new and different, right? That's the idea behind it.
I love that. You're much braver than I in terms of embracing, but I hear that a lot, and that's part of the defensiveness. Somehow approaching it from this idea of deficit, you know. So it's not, and I use this in training, but also to my class about inclusion and including others and diversifying the table. The first thing I always say is there is enough for us all. There is enough. And if you approach it, you know, from that, you know, that perspective, right? That perspective of it being bountiful, that there is enough for everyone. I think that is a different conversation. And then the other thing is, it's a conversation of and. not or. It's not the white male or the Black female.
Right.
And that's typically how people frame it, right? Oh my gosh, if you bring in this, it's going to be them or, them. And I was like, it can be a conversation of right? This collaborative conversation of, it can be the white male and the Black female and our wonderful Hispanic, female or male, and just everyone. And that's what makes for a robust conversation. But I hear that a lot, a lot of white males, especially in leadership positions, feeling like, as I heard someone say in a training, we're gonna be obsolete someday.
Right. Yeah.
And I had to pause because I was at the front of the room and I was like, the whole system is designed like that will take, I don't think I'll see it in lifetimes. You know what I mean? But his whole fear, right? It's fear-based like everything else that we experience, is that there will be no place for me. And so that dovetailed into the conversation, Dr. McGee, about allyship, co-conspiracy, and how you can advocate, right, for justice, So I would love just kind of your perspective on that, and I'll just keep up with the chat and make sure I bring up some things that I'm seeing here.
Yeah. So sorry, I was looking at the chat too, Joanna, and saw some really good comments in here that I wanted to address. Is that okay if I do that?
Please. Oh my gosh, absolutely. Please, this is your time. And as they're chatting, I know I'm making vigorous notes, but if you could address some of them, there's some deep kind of thoughts here. So yes, if you could, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I want to do that. And then I have one more thing I want to ask participants to do.
Excellent.
So I'm trying to find it here. Okay, yeah, Sarah asked made a reference to the overlap of evolution of religion and the role of the church along with triple loop thinking. And that's a really good insight. So I have not personally dug into that, Sarah, as from a religious viewpoint. I've dug into it from more of an organizational standpoint, but even further so, how we learn as individuals. It doesn't matter what religion a person may or may not follow. So I think that's a really good point. And that's something I would love to, in the future, near future, probably dive into to see how that connects to each other, triple loop and the church, especially. And I saw another comment here, how this nation was founded on Christian principles. So that would be really good to break down, just from a historical lens, from a religious lens, just to see how this triple loop learning really plays into that. So I really appreciate that comment.
Right. That's wonderful. And I just think that that's powerful. So I love that, they're thinking like, when I read that, I had to pause for a second. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's something I want to. So Sarah, we may have to, Sarah's been a supporter of ours for many, 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 many years. But so Sarah, we may have to have a coffee connect to see if we can kind of digest that and debrief it. So. Yeah.
And include me into that too, because
there you go.
My book actually kind of talks about that too, which she brought up. So I just haven't dug in it deep enough. But yeah, I would love to talk about that.
Wonderful. We do have some questions that we've posted in the chat area that I would love for you all to kind of just have thoughts around. And we want to give you some time to actually do this. So I know, Dr. McGee, you wanted to kind of close off with that last piece.
Yes.
And instruction for the group as well. And looking forward to hearing your questions. So if anyone, again, would like to go live, would love to be able to answer any thoughts, even if it's a comment. It doesn't have to necessarily be a question, but if you've got comments that you'd like to share with myself or Dr. McGee, would love to bring you live or at least hear the audio of you. So Dr. McGee?
Yeah. So I just wanted to finish up with this question. What is one actionable step you can take now to close the racial leadership gap in your organization? Now, I know, again, many presentations, you've all been on webinars and other meetings and things like that, will pose a question for you to walk away with. But I want you to take this serious in the context of, within 7 days, we want to know what you've done, okay? So if you want to, you can email me. I'll put my email back up here again, Joanna or someone else, or maybe you have an accountability partner that's on this webinar with you that you can share your information with. But within 7 days, okay, I want to see or hear some people that have taken a step, okay? And it doesn't have to be a huge step. For example, you change the entire HR department. That's a huge step. Just something small within your realm of influence in your organization that you can change to start closing the racial leadership gap. And I gave you some questions earlier to start pondering over, maybe start addressing. Maybe it is the triple loop question, right? How do we know it's right? How do you decide what's right, right? It could be something like that. So I want you to take the time to do that. And I would love to hear if you want to come off of mute or just drop it in the chat. What are some ideas, actionable steps that you can take in your organization? Okay.
That's great. So yes, would love to. And we've got a hand that's raised. So Rosalinda Erives, I hope I said that right. Rosalinda. So let's see here. And Brent, were you going to see, did you want to ask a question, Rosalinda? And if so, we can bring you on so that we can hear your question. I'm looking in the chat. Oh, and while we're doing that, and we've got 2 participants that's got their hands raised. So Jeff P., if you could help, or Brent, if you could help bring them on so we can bring them on live to ask their question, that would be great. Someone also asked the question about how to access this recording. We are so grateful in that all of our webinars are recorded. That's huge because it's a chance for you to share with other people and share the link. So give us just a few days. We do some editing things to ensure that it's concise and we really get it, to where it can be viewed in one sitting, but it will be available on our website. And so you'll get a chance to look at the recording again. And we do that because, sometimes you hear something, but then you miss some other good stuff. So I always like to go back and say, okay, let me kind of, reconcile between my notes and then what I heard. So we will have that available on the Diversity Leadership Alliance website. So you will have a chance to be able to see that. So wonderful. So are we going to have Rosalinda come on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, wonderful. Yes, welcome.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Hi there.
Hi. So I'm with the City of Phoenix and I work in the Equal Opportunity Department. And one thing that I wanted to share that the city as a whole does, which is I find very respectable and amazing, is that we have employee resource groups. So we have a Phoenix Hispanic Network, NFBPA, the Phoenix Asian League, and LGBTQ. We have different resource groups that host brown bags and events. And I find it very interesting, the different cultures for each of the groups and the struggles, because all the groups have struggles, but there's also the educational side. And these groups welcome everybody. It's not just Phoenix Hispanic Network is not just for the Hispanics, it's for the whole city in general. So one of my favorite conferences is the NFBPA because I always seem to get so much out of that. And the respect and love and everything that I get from it is just wonderful, and as well as the other groups. But I just wanted to share that helps just understanding the different cultures. For someone who was only brought up in one culture has been such an eye-opener and such a beautiful respect towards everyone else. And not that I didn't have respect towards everyone else, but it just educating people on it's okay to be different and just embrace what people have to bring to the table and learn from each other and just be kind. I mean, I don't understand why that message isn't sinking into some people's heads. It's beyond me.
They missed that lesson in school, that be kind. There were songs about it, but apparently they were not there that day. Yeah. And I
Right.
agree with what Brent says in there, this idea of being fragile, right? The fragility of it. And I think that there's some validity. But Rosalinda, I just want to say, lots of cities are doing this, but I want to commend the city of Phoenix because they are taking this work seriously. I mean, they're in the process now of bringing on their first ever, Rosalinda, right, diversity DEI director, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Tremendous. Dawn is a friend, and Dawn has been doing some wonderful things, but they're taking these kind of next steps very seriously, right? We talked about the executive leadership position, and that's just what they've created around this DEI space. So Rosalinda, and to all of our friends in the city of Phoenix, we see you, we honor you, and we cheer you for the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
And let's see, we've got another comment. I think Nikki had her hand up. And I don't know if she's still going to be able to speak with us, but if
She
Nikki
did have her hand up, but it went away, so I can't find her now. So if you would like to speak, Nikki, please raise your hand again so you pop to the top of the list. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Other questions and comments, and Dr. McGee, any other comments that you wanted to make sure you addressed as we're looking at ERGs and the idea of fragility and some other things that have kind of surfaced to the top of this chat conversation? So I don't know if you want to take just a second, but would love to know your answers. So I know we've got 7 days to do it, but what's the one thing? I would love to know what's the one thing folks are thinking about that they're going to do in the next kind of 7 days. What's that one thing we're thinking about? Anyone want to pop that in the chat for us if they already know? Mine was just to reserve judgment. I tend to, we do this work so often, Dr. McGee, you know this, right? So you already have your mind wrapped around what this specific group, whether it's an affluent group or a predominantly Anglo male group, or whatever it is, right? I've been training myself, right? And this is one of the relearning for me, to reserve judgment. Let them show you, right, how they want to show up, how they will show up, and not go in with my preconceived trainer mind, right, of exactly what I'm gonna have to tell this group. So is there one, do you do this? What are some things that that you kind of have been thinking around this?
Yeah, that's really good. And I think, it goes back to that old saying, we have 2 of these and 1 of these, right? Amen. So, right. So listening more and being slow to speak really helps me understand where people are coming from. Again, I welcome people that have different perspectives than me. I want people around me that have different perspectives than me. That's how I learn. That's how I grow. And you do that without casting judgment. So I love that, Joanna, because it's reserving judgment. It's hard because we've been trained over the past few decades to just judge something as soon as you see it or as soon as you hear it, not pause for a second. That goes into the mindfulness conversations, right? Pause, think about it for a while before you respond. So that's how I try to do it. I don't always succeed at it, but I at least try.
Right. And what's interesting, and my son, so my son AJ has taught me this, because typically, because of his disability, and this is how it works with him, he has to process it. I always say he has to put in a file folder first, and then he'll respond. And usually his response is wonderful, something I would never think of. But society has taught us to, boom, have an answer right away, right. Jump straight to the, and even in class, I have to do it. And I see students getting impatient. I'll ask a student a question, and depending on, and they'll kind of think.
Right.
And the other students will be like, come on, she asked you a question. I'm like, okay, time out, right? Allow them to process, So when you said slow to speak, that is profound for me. And being patient to receive. Once that person has taken the time to be slow to speak. We get really, society has taught us you have to be quick, fast, and first to the finish line and kind of things, and we don't realize that other people have to process. They're literally processing, and we don't get time to process.
Nope.
So that's something. I love that, slow to speak. And we've got a couple of other things. Betty, who has been a volunteer with our education committee since DLA's inception, really. I love what she says here. And Ms. Betty says, listen with the intent to understand.
Right.
Have you ever been in conversations where you listen, people are already, they're thinking of what they're going to say, so they're not really listening with intention, right? So yes, I love that, Betty. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Let's see. And someone said, I love this. Jalissa mentions that she makes it a point to ask people, what's their story?
Yeah, that's good. That's powerful. Yep.
It really is.
Yep.
I'm always so taken aback when someone asks me, what's my story, as opposed to assuming that they know, okay, African-American female, yes. And I'm like, actually, no, but, and that always throws people off. Like, what do you mean? You fit the little box I had carved for you so well, So that's one I just love. And we've just got some really good things that are being, you guys are so wonderful. And I love that you're making comments here. So before we close out, though, I just wanted to see any last parting words, Dr. McGee, that you want to leave with this group now before we head to our close.
Yeah, I think, just the last thing is, this whole conversation was around, closing this racial leadership gap. Yes. And I believe we all have our part to play in it. It's not going to close tomorrow. It may not close 5 years from now, but let's celebrate the small wins, right? That we are able to be attribute to the process of closing this gap. So we all can do something within this space. So don't think you can't do anything because you're maybe not in a leadership position. Maybe you're too old, maybe you're too young, maybe you're not this tall, this short, you know what I mean? So it doesn't matter. We all come from diverse backgrounds. We all think differently, which is beautiful, but let's make the conscious effort to try to do something to close this racial leadership gap.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, what a powerful, I was taking notes. I'm like trying to write fast. So I will have to go back and watch this later because I know there's some really wonderful key things that I missed. I am so happy that you were able to join us, that your schedule allowed you to join us. And I am just grateful for your time, your expertise, and your continual support, because this is the second time you've presented for us. We look forward to having you back. And a special thank you to all of you, our participants. We do this for you. So the fact that it's engaging and that you feel edified and you've walked away with some resources and different thought patterns that you can now relearn is wonderful. That's really what this is all about and really why we continue to do this. I'm going to actually bring in someone to close us out because unfortunately I'm always double, triple booked. And so I've got an interview that I have to do at 11 a.m. So I do have to prepare for that. But no fear, the dynamic Dr. Renee Batik-Klug, I've been dying to call you that. So now I get to call you that in this environment. Congratulations again, is going to close us out. She is on our DLA education committee and has done a tremendous job and is also responsible for actually bringing Dr. McGee to us this month. So with that, I bid you all adieu, and I would love to just have us close out Dr. Renee Batik-Klug. So thank you all. Cheers.
All right, thanks so much, Joanna. And thank you so much, Dr. McGee. I learned so much from you and in this chat. It was so robust. People really valued what you had to say. So the work we do here at DLA would not be possible without the important contributions from our volunteers, sponsors, and our esteemed board of directors members. I wanted to give some recognition to a few key people that were responsible for today's program. Thank you to our DLA Education Committee members who are responsible for planning the monthly workshops. I want to thank Jeff Pudwell and Dr. Brent Scholar for working behind the scenes, and of course, Joanna Deshay for facilitating our talk. A special thank you goes out to Maria Radloff of Via Maria, our webmaster who places all video content on our DLA YouTube page. We would not be able to do the work we do without the support of our amazing sponsors that help to underwrite programs such as the webinar session you attended today. Thank you to Mayo Clinic and Mr. Marion Kelly. And also a special thank you to the Tegna Foundation and Channel 12 and Miss Kate Morris, their general manager. If you have enjoyed today's workshop and content, please consider supporting DLA further by making a donation. Your donations help us continue these vital dialogues and also help keep workshops and content like this complimentary to the community. In the chat area is the link to click and make your donations online. DLA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so your donations may be tax deductible, but please consult your tax advisor. So I'd like to say thank you so much. I'll move it over to Brent, and thank you again, Dr. McGee.
All right, thank you, Renee, very much. Just really quick, if you would like to know when our next webinars are going to be, our save the dates are up here. Of course, we have today's wonderful show by Dr. Jeff McGee, and we'll have our hiatus in May. It's graduation season, a little bit of vacation season, so we're taking a little vacation. We are working as the education committee to come up for an amazing program. We're really close to finalizing that. So we'll make that announcement soon for June 16th, same DLA time, same DLA station, 9 to 11 a.m. on Thursdays. And again, that'll be June 16th. And then you can look ahead to August 25th, September 22nd, our annual conference, October 12th through the 14th, and then November 17th. So look on our Facebook page, our LinkedIn, or our website for the link, as well as an email. So another very special thank you to Dr. Jeff McGee for his time today, cross-cultural dynamics, and of course our moderator, Joanna Deshay, the Executive Director of DLA. If your organization has a need for strategic planning and implementation, please consider giving Dr. McGee and his team at CCD a call. And then of course, a final very special thank you to all of you, because we couldn't be here without you. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day, and please make sure to fill out your survey. Take care, everyone.